It's no secret that Neia dies in her battle against the demi-humans. She was stationed at a position where not a single survivor was ordered to be kept, and with the Liberation Army both outnumbered and outclassed, the end result was always going to be a massacre. The movie surprisingly adapts the battle fairly well, but if you're curious as to the darker details revolving around Neia's untimely demise, stick around as this will cover all of that. Let's get started. Part 15. The Mad-Eyed Shooter. With major movement finally detected from the demi-humans, now was the time to prepare for the impending attack from them. Remedios would be in the war room with 3 other paladins, determining how best to allocate their troops. It's pretty much what we saw in the movie, except prior to Gustav's arrival, there was a lengthy back and forth in how to approach the situation. Remedios might be skilled when it comes to tactics in battle, but for a situation such as this, finding a victory was difficult. So, from preemptive strikes to focusing on one gate then moving to the next, the disparity in numbers made any of her plans unfeasible. Top that off with Gustav coming in saying how the citizens wanted AINZ to fight, and you'd be surprised as to her true reason for denying even asking. You see, as much as Remedios would have liked for AINZ and Jaldaboath to take each other out, it's not like she wanted AINZ to lose. So, if AINZ said he needed time to recover his mana, then that was time she wanted to give him. Whatever he needed to fight at full power, Remedios was willing to provide. Turns out the nobles had even offered a lofty sum to AINZ directly, but despite the sizable amount of it, AINZ would still refuse. It was an outcome Gustav knew he couldn't let slip to the public, at least not if he wanted the morale to stay at the level it was. When the topic of Lady Kalka came up after, there was a bit more as to why the people might see AINZ as their ruler. You see, even if the queen did somehow come back, the fact remained that it wasn't her who had saved them. Sure, the paladins were here fighting on their behalf now, but if AINZ was the one providing the most success in defending them, then the question of who they trust more was a simple one to answer. That being the case, if the population's devotion came down to who was the best guarantee of safety, choosing AINZ was all but natural. It was a tough notion for Remedios to wrap her head around, so much so that she would actually break down into a little fit of rage. She would slam the table with enough force to break right through it, showing just how strong and passionate she was. Still, that didn't change the fact AINZ had saved the people from their suffering, and that was a truth Remedios would have no choice but to accept. So, no matter what they did, AINZ's actions had already grasped the full support of the people. In fact, based on what the paladins were hearing around the city, there was even the chance the country could split because of him. Should AINZ choose to declare this city as part of his own nation, not only would no one be able to stop him, most people would actually be in support of it. The neighboring countries likely wouldn't do anything either, as to make a move on the Sorcerer Kingdom was far too dangerous for them. Besides, by expanding its territory, the Sorcerer Kingdom would only be spreading its defenses thinner, an outcome most other nations would find quite favorable. So, when it came down to it, Remedios needed to understand that people would rather be safe within an undead's nation than struggle in one where they couldn't be protected. That's not to say the situation wasn't salvageable, but for their nation's supposed enemy to end up as their savior, that only makes said enemy look even better. Their only choice then was to do things themselves, so they would choose not to inform the people that AINZ wouldn't be fighting alongside them, then fend off the demi-humans without him. Their hopes were to show the people the Holy Kingdom was strong enough to defeat their enemies without a foreign power. This brings us now to Neia, who was currently running to her position on the west gate. It was as she did that everyone who saw her stared in awe, captivated by the bow she wielded and the equipment she wore. Occasionally, she would hear the murmurs of people referring to her as the Sorcerer King's attendant, a title that made her happy to be associated with. Now, with most of the demi-humans amassing by the west gate, 80% of all able-bodied soldiers would be stationed there. The other 20% would be sent to the east gate, while the women, children, and elderly would be stationed as scouts on the northern and southern walls. Remedios would be the one in command at the west gate, while Gustav would be in charge of the east. Caspond was the commander-in-chief, but he was holed up deep into the city. Neia's position brought with it quite a bit of anxiety, since knowing just how strong the demi-humans were, it wouldn't be hard for them to just break the gates down. And should the enemies flow through such an opening, then Neia knew it would be impossible to fight back. She knew that would be certain death for her. Such was a sentiment that seemed to be shared across many of the soldiers, as all seemed terrified of the battle they were about to fight. Seeing Neia led them to believe the Sorcerer King might actually be coming, but that was a hope Neia couldn't let them fight with. In fact, that hope was a tool her superiors seemed to want to take advantage of, since the moment Neia made a move to head to her position at the center of the wall, an order from the top would have her stay put. At first, Neia wasn't sure why they wanted her to do that, as the place she was in now was very crowded. There was lots of back and forth traffic, so to her she felt she would just be in the way. It was when Neia finally asked the question of why that the question would be answered by the actions of those around her. You see, everyone who recognized Neia knew her as the Sorcerer King's attendant. This in turn brought their morale up and even triggered some excitement, likely because she was a sign that the Sorcerer King would be coming. Since none were aware he wasn't yet, Neia was the symbol of hope these soldiers needed. I mean, many even thought she was from the Sorcerer Kingdom herself, so that alone put her on a pedestal above them. It was when some soldiers came to ask her about His Majesty that her superior's attempt to stop the discussion made it clear what they were trying to do with her. Neia, however, would have none of it, and instead would answer the soldiers' questions truthfully, eventually making it clear AINZ wasn't going to be there to save them this time. What Neia expected was anger and uproar, but instead the sentiment she was met with was approval. Because AINZ had made it clear he needed his mana to fight Jaldaboath, everyone understood why it was he wasn't participating. They felt everything he'd done so far was more than enough. So, with new resolve to fight for themselves, Neia and the others would take their positions. They would have enough time to gulp down one last meal before the fight, a cold mush that was once hot milk mixed with barley. It wasn't the greatest motivator to know this could very well be their last meal, but filling their stomachs was essential to surviving at all. The gruel wasn't the only reason for such a downcast attitude, as with many of the soldiers being former prisoners of the demi-humans, the thought of being subjected to that again left them devastated. There was a distinct fear amongst them that made Neia ask what would His Majesty do. Neia knew she would never be able to replicate him, but at the same time she also felt that she didn't need to. Reason being that, despite the dire situation, the soldiers still hadn't given in to despair yet. And that was all because of what AINZ had done earlier. After mentioning to the survivors that he too would lose everything in the face of a greater power than himself, they understood that even he carried the same resolve that they did. So, if even the great Sorcerer King had an intense drive to protect that which was important to him, those who had to fight knew that they should too. It was a clear message that Neia felt was the only reason the army hadn't collapsed in on itself yet. And with AINZ probably not even trying to do so, Neia just reaffirmed that AINZ was this king among kings, a true supreme being that no other ruler could ever compare to. It was then the demi-humans would begin their approach, signaling everyone to get ready. The ground shook as over 10,000 demi-humans marched in tandem, quickly lowering the morale more than it was before. Neia wished she could do something about it, but her role was to simply shoot enemies the moment they were in her range. She had actually gotten quite good with using her bow, as any time not spent with AINZ was instead spent learning the ins and outs of Ultimate Shooting Star Super. So much so that she had actually gotten quite confident with it. It was a bit peculiar that the demi-humans were marching during the day, but with no AINZ to ask such a question to, all Neia could do was be extra cautious about it. So, first came the ballistas, a relentless barrage exactly how we saw in the movie. Neia wanted to fire back herself, but with little practice at ranges that far, she wasn't confident she'd be able to land a killing shot here. Now, normally this city would have had ballistas of their own, but with the Bawfolk having been in control of the city earlier, they had gone out of their way to destroy all of them. That being the case, the only way to deal with these ballista-wielding ogres was to fight them head-on, a move that was effectively impossible. This left the ogres uncontested, and that left what was ultimately two choices for the paladins. They could retreat and inevitably be caught by the pursuing demi-humans, or they could hold themselves in, give the demi-humans the leeway they were fighting for, and engage in a battle of attrition. Such was a decision for Remedios, orders which all present could only wait for. It was as they did that they would be met with more volleys, and from that would come an intense fear. The spell Under Divine Flag would remedy that, suppressing their terror enough for the soldiers to feel determination again. That didn't change the fact that they had no way to fight against the ogres, but at the very least they wouldn't be affected by seeing their fellow soldiers get skewered. Shortly after came the firebomb-equipped angels, a counter-offensive which served mostly as a distraction. Not many were able to actually drop their bombs, but the ogres' concern of an attack from above left them aiming their shields upward. It was an opening which gave Neia the opportunity to finally fire on them. She had hoped the arrow would pierce the ogre's eye, instantly killing it, but instead where she hit was its jaw. A place not damaging enough to be fatal, but at the very least Neia did chip away that ogre's will to fight. It would run away not to be seen again. For Neia, she just hoped the demi-humans didn't have a healer, since that really was all it took to send that ogre back out on the battlefield. Now, with Neia having exposed her position, she had no choice but to run, since there would undoubtedly be a counterattack. That was the cause of all the destruction we see here, an unfortunate side effect of fighting alongside an archer. The news they even had an archer had likely spread already, so Neia knew she wouldn't get an opportunity like the one she had before. There was no way the ogres were going to lift their shields and expose themselves again. This meant all Neia could do was wait, since if she wanted to return the bow like how she promised, she knew she couldn't be reckless with it. It was much safer to just be patient and wait for the Ballista Barrage to be over. Eventually it would, and that's when the demi-humans would finally start their next phase. A more direct siege involving ladders and child hostages. That much we saw in the movie, but what we didn't see after was Neia's reaction to taking out the children with the demi-humans. She thought she had fully prepared herself to do it, but when she finally did take that life, panic overwhelmed her. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of it. It was in that moment that Neia would reach for her sword, the object of her childhood which would bring her calm back. Just as AINZ had advised her to do before, touching her most trusted item brought her back to reality. It was as she looked back onto the battlefield that she would see her actions had actually brought results. All the demi-humans around her target had slowed their advance noticeably. They were shaken to find their human shields not working the way they intended. That's when Neia would advise everyone else to do the same thing that she just did, leading to quite a bit of confusion the attackers definitely weren't expecting. Still, the area she slowed was only one part of a massive line, as the rest of the demi-humans weren't even aware of what she had done. The only way her efforts would be rewarded was if all the soldiers took the same action she just did. If they didn't, then the innocent lives she just stole would be meaningless. Plus, to not reduce the number of hostages before they climbed the wall, well, at that point the battle would already be lost. There was no way any of the soldiers could hurt children that were right in front of them. That being the case, Neia's method was essentially just the lesser of two evils for them. So, eventually the rest of the army would get on board with it, but what the movie didn't show was just how tragic such a course of action was. With many of the soldiers throwing only rocks, the targets receiving most of the damage were the children. Not to mention it was non-fatal damage. They weren't able to kill both the hostage and the demi-human the same way Neia was. No, the children were instead forced to be brutalized by both sides. Such was the enactment of sacrificing the few to save the many, except this particular case was very much disturbing. Even so, Neia would continue doing what she had to do. It was as she went to scan for her next target, though, that a curtain of light would envelop her. At first, she thought it to be an enemy magic attack, but after feeling a slight bump on the chest, she knew it was something else. What she found at her feet was the flattened head of a ballista bolt, making it clear her magic armor had just protected her. Despite the bolt being bigger than herself, Buzz's magic armor deflected it perfectly. She had just avoided what could only be described as certain death for her. Neia didn't have time to bask in the moment though, as she refused to let herself submit to fear. To her, the least she could do was continue providing a swift end to all those children who couldn't be saved. Such a sentiment was shared by all the soldiers, and eventually they were able to get rid of the child-wielding vanguard. It was by the time they did, though, that the demi-humans had already set up more ladders than the soldiers could deal with. So, over time, the number of enemies who reached the top of the wall grew steadily. Neia's only thought was to shoot arrow after arrow, but with little practice in such long bouts with her bow, her arms would start to spasm and her fingers give out. Losing the bow would have been detrimental to everyone, so Neia decided this was the time to activate Heavy Recovery, the spell imbued into the necklace AINZ had given her. This made all the soreness in her body go away, and just like that, she was able to fight good as new again. Her next problem came shortly after, and that was her diminishing supply of arrows. Combine that with Jajan the Stone Eater having just killed their commander, and things were looking pretty dire for her. Losing a paladin was a particularly heavy blow for them, since with not very many of them to go around, the loss of just one was a clear sign that they were losing. Not only that, paladins were the only ones capable of taking on the stronger demi-humans. Surprisingly, this was of no concern to Neia, as the only thing she could think about was finding more arrows. She would eventually spot a soldier who did have some, but what she thought was another archer who she would have fall back, it was instead a corpse with half their face missing. It was then that Neia finally took in all the death around her, registering for the first time just how gruesome it all was. She didn't get sick like how she thought she would though, likely a result of having already witnessed people getting eaten alive. Still, Neia would pay her respects to the dead companion in front of her, then continue her fight with an immediate response to Jajan. Her proclamation after left her both unheard and a little bit embarrassed, but it wasn't entirely ineffective. The demi-human's aggression had clearly lessened. Neia would then enter the equivalent of the zone from Kuroko no Basket and reach a level of mastery with her bow that was approaching her father's. Funnily enough, with the way she fought, the way she looked, and the armor she possessed, many believed Neia to be the same person as her father, the mad-eyed shooter and the demon archer of the Holy Kingdom. Neia knew they were mistaken, but after single-handedly taking down an entire squad of terror poses with terrifying precision, Neia was starting to believe it too. The way she was fighting wasn't human. Unfortunately, this state of hyper-focus wouldn't last forever, and as her concentration waned, so too would Neia's ability to fight. She would get her arm cut and lose portion of her air, but even then the demi-humans were still cautious in how they engaged. In the end, the final face-off would be 6 humans against 34 demi-humans. Before, there were at least 20 citizen soldiers fighting to protect Neia, but now this was all that was left. The reason the soldiers were even fighting to protect Neia is because her actions before resulted in their lives being saved. After having killed Jajan and reversing the momentum, the demi-humans stopped rushing their position like they were before. It had granted time and space so the other soldiers could fight back. Seeing as how Neia wasn't able to use her bow anymore though, the remaining soldiers felt she should just run. One in particular had a daughter the same age as Neia, so for him he couldn't bear to see the death of someone as young as her. Plus, with Neia's skill with the sword subpar at best, what really could she even do in this situation? Neia couldn't bear to abandon the kindness these soldiers showed to her though, so rather than run like how AINZ suggested, Neia decided fighting to the end would send a stronger message than returning AINZ's bow to him. She wanted to show him that not everyone in the Holy Kingdom was like the Paladins. She wanted him to know that there were people willing to repay kindness with kindness. So, as she charged forward striking down any demi-human she could, eventually her and the soldiers alongside her would get overwhelmed. It was only a matter of time before she was the last one standing, and with demi-humans approaching from all sides, that's when Neia knew her time had come. She knew this was going to be the result all along, yet for some reason, now that it was here, she was terrified. Even if she was bound for the land of repose as the holy gods would determine, the end of her current life was still frightening. So, as every part of her body screamed that it wanted to rest, Neia refused to fall, all for one simple reason. She wanted to be worthy of the gear she was lent. So long as she was still capable of breathing, Neia remained standing all the way until the end. It was only after multiple weapons were thrust at her all at once that did her body finally give way, thus closing the curtain on Neia, at least for a little bit. In the movie, AINZ resurrects her right away, but in the novel we actually get that whole scene with Remedios first. That's what we'll talk about next episode though, so if you like this one and want to see more, then consider leaving a like and subscribing. I've also been mixing it up with the content for a bit, so if you want to see Easter eggs in Isekai Quartet or some news on Yojo Senki, then feel free to check out these videos too. But anyway, until next time, ciao!